For part 2 of our interview series with Ryan Payton, we take a whistle-stop tour of his career and time in Japan. We also begin into discussion on why Shenmue did not capture the mainstream audience that it was intended for upon its release. Right, I'm obviously aware of your time as well, to the top of the hour. So before I dive straight in, I just wanted to give you a congratulations, actually, for Iron Man VR being nominated Best VR Game at the Game Awards.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we're really looking forward to that event. We know we have some stiff competition with Half-Life Alyx and a lot of other good VR games in that category, but we're really honored to be nominated and really happy to see that.
Yeah, he said some big hitters in there, so to be among those very big name titles, I think it's a testament to the job that the team have done on that game.
Oh, thank you.
Absolutely well done. It's well deserved. So
thank you.
Diving in, I'm going to take you all the way back to high school.
Oh, right. No way.
Oh yeah, all the way back to high school. When we spoke previously, you mentioned it just then in your Shenmue memory, you got to go to Japan in high school. Was that something you always wanted to do when you were at high school? Was it just an opportunity that presented itself that you took?
Well, I'll go a little bit back further in time, Matt, if you don't mind, which
yeah,
is growing up in suburban America, more in the Northwest area. We live between Washington State and Oregon State. My dad worked for a variety of big Japanese conglomerates, including Mitsubishi and Kobe Seiko. And he would come back from these business trips in Japan, bringing all sorts of treasures from the Far East, like toys and things like that. And I remember just being really amazed by it. And I always look forward to him coming back home and hearing his stories. And so I think from a very early age, he kind of, whether he knew it or not, he kind of seeded this fascination in the Japanese culture in me. And so so there was that aspect of it, which may or may not be related to the fact that I was so enamored by the original Nintendo and Super Mario Brothers when I saw that. And so in an early age also just really instilled like this interest in video games. So it's a very simple crossover, right? When you're interested in video games, there's a lot of Japanese aspects of that, right?
Yeah,
and so,
absolutely.
So I'm growing up, really loving Final Fantasy VI. When I saw Final Fantasy VII in the magazines, I decided, you know what, I can't wait for the English version of this game. I'm going to learn Japanese. And thankfully, the high school that I was going to, while it didn't offer Japanese as a language option, the neighboring high school did. So I was able to actually convince the school board to allow me to fulfill my language course requirements by going to the neighboring high school for Japanese classes. And I had just like really one ambition, which was I'm going to learn Japanese as fast as I can so I can play Final Fantasy VII when it comes out in Japan, which was a super lofty and, in retrospect, really stupid goal, because there's just no way that some high school kid, through high school Japanese is going to be able to learn as much Japanese in the amount of time to really understand what's going on in the game. But that was my goal, and it was a really good goal to have, I think, even though I ultimately failed in not being able to grasp all of Final Fantasy VII when I was in high school. But yeah, that's kind of where everything started. And then when I was, my dad had another business trip coming up, and he asked me if I'd be interested in going along with him. So I was able to go with him to the factories that he was working in, and it just only fueled more interest I had in the culture and the language. Eventually, I did an exchange program when I was in high school to Japan, and that's I think where I really got to see like the Yokosuka. Like, I didn't go to Yokosuka in particular, but like the things you're seeing in that area of Shenmue, where you have like the style of housing and like the rooms and the different like objects that you're finding in all these different Japanese homes, the smells, but it's in like the nameplates outside of the different homes. That level of detail, when I was able to re-experience that in Shenmue in the video game, I think that was like where it really transported me back to when I was in high school. Yeah, spending time over there.
That sounds absolutely amazing, especially for a high school student to go over there and experience that culture at that young age as well. I think it's an ambition of mine to go to Japan eventually. as it is, I think, for a lot of gamers out there, as you say, if you like gaming, Japan's synonymous with it at the end of the day, isn't it? So they almost go hand in hand together, and it's interesting to see that. I really want to see the culture differences between the United Kingdom and Japan and how they do things. I think it's definitely an experience that's on my bucket list, shall we say.
Well, let me know when you make the pilgrimage, Matt, because I'll try my best to be there. Because before COVID hit, I was in Japan about every month.
Oh, really?
Pretty consistently, yeah. So I'd love to show you around and make sure you're taken care of.
If I make it out there, then I will absolutely take you up on that offer. That's a really kind offer. Thank you.
Of course, and I will say one thing about the rise and recent fall of tourism in Japan. I have a theory. I can't back this up with data, but I have a pretty strong theory that one of the reasons why Japan has become such a popular tourist destination over the past 5 years, where it's like the numbers have skyrocketed. They've done a lot of advertising. They've got the Olympics coming up, but it's been a very deliberate campaign on the part of the Japanese government to increase tourism as a really major industry for the country. And my theory is that a lot of the tourists that are coming through Japan are actually fell in love with the country when they're younger through video games and anime and manga in particular. And now that they're old enough to now they're more affluent, they have more spending dollars, they want to travel. It's like an easy, no-brainer destination for a lot of people because they have this affirmation for the culture where the cultural explosion really happened right in the 80s and 90s, right, from Japan.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Actually, I think there's a lot of people my age, that have experienced video games, gone through that evolution and seeing Japan from afar, and it's an interest. And I think anime now it's become more westernized in terms of its accessibility. It's only fueled that, if anything, hasn't it? I think.
No, totally, absolutely.
Okay, moving sort of onto your early gaming career. You said to me when we spoke previously, you worked with various outlets across your time. So, sort of moving into what sort of freelance jobs did you do when you sort of started yourself out in the industry? What were you doing?
Well, I got my start writing video game reviews for my school newspaper back when I was a college student, and that led to a job with Ziff Davis. Originally was with Xbox Nation magazine.
Oh yeah.
And I was able to get that job as a freelancer because I just took out clippings of my college newspaper game reviews and sent those over to a San Francisco address where Xbox Nation magazine was, because I was so excited I loved Xbox Nation magazine, one of my favorite magazines growing up. And thankfully they responded to me and they told me that they'd be interested in having a Japanese correspondent, because in my letter to them I told them I was going to be moving to Japan soon to join the JET program to learn or to teach English over in Japan.
Oh yeah.
So that's where I got my start. I started writing articles for Xbox Nation magazine, and the nice thing, and as you probably remember about the Ziff Davis network, is that it wasn't just Xbox Nation. They had Electronic Gaming Monthly, they had the PlayStation magazine, they had GMR, and they also had OneUp.com. So it was a pretty natural extension to start writing articles for those other publications as well. And then that's when, like, once you start getting these articles printed and in magazines and websites, it's like a lot easier to go get your next gig. So I ended up writing for Japan Times, which is like the biggest English-based newspaper in Japan. I ended up writing a little bit for Wired magazine, a couple of UK magazines, some UK Xbox magazines as well.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so it just kind of really blossomed to the point where I had more work than I needed, really.
Oh, excellent. And then, so you're doing all your writing, you work for these magazines. So how did the transition come to working for Konami and the Metal Gear Solid series? How did that sort of manifest itself while you were out there?
Yeah, this is a story I really like to tell, which is so picture this. I'm in a Japanese fishing village, population of about 35,000 people. I'm in a dorm because I'm teaching English at the nearby high school right next door. I have no central heating. There's about a meter worth of snow outside of my place. I'm huddled around a kerosene stove, and it all sounds like a big like exaggeration, but this is really the truth. And I'm sitting there writing articles at night for these different publications I'm working for, and I'm teaching English in the daytime. And at a certain point, I'll save this story for another time, but I end up getting in trouble because I end up uh, uh, this sounds awful, and in a way it kind of is, but I end up like getting in a physical dispute with a student who touched my co-teacher very inappropriately during class, and I so I got reprimanded for being physical with that student, and so I was told to not come to work for a couple of months while like the school board figured out what to do about me. Long story short, I ended up being reinstated, and they understood why I did that, because I was trying to protect my female colleague. But in the meantime, I realized, you know what, this is probably not what I want to do for the rest of my life, and so I ended up quitting and moving to Osaka and going to a Japanese school to improve my Japanese, and meanwhile just trying to keep the lights on and pay for tuition through my continued work as a freelancer. And so what ended up happening was 2005, it was E3's up on the horizon, so I ended up booking a flight to E3. I told my editor, James Milkey over at oneup.com, that I'm going to be there and I'd be willing to write articles for oneup.com for any games that wanted me to check out on the show floor of E3. And he said, sure, he's got a couple of things. And I remember reviewing Okami for DS and Beautiful Joe, I think also for DS, was one of my gigs. And they would pay me a little bit of money per article, and that's okay. And I remember running around the show floor and doing my work, and I get this call from James Milkey, and it's on my phone coming in. I'm like, oh, man, he's probably going to have me review other games. I don't know if I want to. I already have a lot on my plate. And I'm thank God, Matt, that I picked up that phone, because there are these moments in your life where it comes down to these small decisions that you make. Your life can totally change. And I really did sit there thinking, do I want to answer this phone from my boss, basically? And thank God I did, because if I didn't, I wouldn't be talking to you today. I wouldn't be where I am right now. I picked up the phone and James Milkey said, dude, I just double booked. I have to go to interview with Hideo Kojima, but also an interview with Sakaguchi, the creator of Final Fantasy. I'm going to take the Sakaguchi interview if you could run to the Hideo Kojima interview and take that one for me. And I said, sure, I'd be more than happy to. In fact, I just finished Metal Gear Solid 3. And so that was, and I love it. I absolutely love the game. He's like, okay, good. Now go interview him about Metal Gear Solid 3 Subsistence, the kind of remaster, not the remaster, but the extended version that they were building. I said, oh, sure, I'll be more than happy to do that. So I went and did that interview. And during the interview with Hideo, he noticed that I wasn't trying to be that guy, but he noticed that I didn't need the translator, that I understood what he was saying. And I didn't have to wait for the translator, Aki Saito, to finish the English translation. I understood what he was saying. And so after the interview, after Hideo left and I was kind of talking to his translator, and he and I became really close friends, Hideo came back from the restroom and was like, you understood everything I was saying in the interview, didn't you? And I said, yeah, I did. And we're speaking in Japanese, obviously. And he said, well, he's like, why do you speak with an Osaka accent? And I said, oh, because I'm living in Osaka right now. He's like, really? He's like, well, you know what? I just let go my English sidekick, basically. Would you be interested in interviewing with me for a job? And I said, I'd be more than happy to do that. So yeah, I went back to Japan and arranged an interview up in Tokyo to get the job. And I went up there and interviewed. They asked me to come back, and then I came back again, interviewed, came back, I think a third time. And by this point, I was starting to exhaust all my money, right? Because I'd spent all this money going to E3, and then the train trips up and back and forth between Tokyo were becoming pretty expensive.
Yeah.
And then they told me that even though it seemed like you were a shoo-in, we're really sorry you didn't get the job.
Oh.
So I was very dejected. I thought I was like a shoo-in, right? Because he basically told me, like, kind of in a way, almost like told me, I'd be a shoo-in for the job. And so I thought, you know what? I'm running out of money. I just got spit on by a Japanese student from the neighboring school, because he just started spitting on from up above, like from a different floor. He was like spitting on all the foreign students because there was a little bit of tension, I think, between the Japanese students and the foreign students, which still continues to this day.
Mm.
And I'm thinking, what the hell am I doing here? You know? So I thought, okay, screw this, and I moved back to the States. And I thought, you know what? I'm moving back in with my parents, so let's just go full on. Let's go do this. I swear to God, I went to Costco. I bought the Burning Crusade double pack for World of Warcraft and a 48 pack of Mountain Dew, and I said, let's do this. And so I said, like, I'm just going to go into WoW for a while, right? And as I'm trying to get addicted to WoW, it's not going very well. But like 5 or 7 days into this whole thing, I get an email from Konami, and they say, "Hey, we're terribly sorry, but we made a huge mistake, and you actually did get the job. Can you start like next week or something?" And I said, "Well, that's good news, but I'm back in the States, and I just spent all my money to get back home. And could you at least fund my relocation back to Japan?" They said, "No, we're not going to do that." So I honestly remember sitting there thinking, that's not fair, man. That's like they made the mistake, and I spent all this money. That's not fair. Like, do I want to work for a place like that? And I remember sitting there, and that's another moment, right, Matt, like where you think about these like micro decisions. And this was a macro decision. And I again, thank God I made the right call, and I responded, said, okay, fine, I'll cover all the travel expenses, the moving, and all that stuff. I'll come back, and the rest is history.
Wow, I really like that story. It's just like you say, it's those pivotal moments, isn't it? That split-second decision you make, and you don't know, right, do you, until after the event you look back at those things and go, wow, how different things could be had you not picked the phone up, or had you not managed to get yourself back out to Japan, which I can imagine must have been very difficult to get back out there after they offered you the job.
And there's like other countless moments in my life, I assume with your life as well, where I remember thinking, well, actually, you know what? I know this is not about Shenmue in particular, but the only reason why the company that I have the privilege of running, Camouflage, was able to get the privilege of making the Iron Man VR game was because I decided to go out with my buds that night at E3. Many years later, this is like E3 2016. I was at my buddy Brian Intahar's place, who's the director of the Spider-Man game.
Oh, wow.
I was there with Mark McDonald, who's the production lead of Tetris Effect and Res Infinite, and Luke Smith, who's the game director of Destiny 2. The four of us love to hang out at E3. We're all hanging out in Brian's place, and we're like, we should probably go out to just kind of mingle and socialize. It's all E3. All of our friends are in town. I was tired. The demo for Resident Evil 7 had just come out. I wanted to play that. I didn't want to go out and see people, but they convinced me to go out. And thank God I did, because when we were out there at the JW Marriott lobby is when I met the head of Marvel Games, Jay Ung. We had a conversation about VR. We had a conversation about me talking with him later on about doing a VR game. And sure enough, it was that conversation which led to Iron Man VR. If I had decided to not go out that night, I don't even know if our company would still be around, quite honestly. So yeah, it's like all these like really these interesting decision points, right, which really can change your life.
Yeah, wow. It's funny, isn't it? That you think about those small decisions that someone just convincing you to go on, why not, and it changes your whole path. And and we just touched on Iron Man VR, didn't we? And it's been nominated for VR Game of the Year. So it's
right, clearly
an excellent decision by all means.
It was a great decision, but then you can also imagine, like, this is like a morbid example, but like, like what if we got in a car accident or something that night? Like we shouldn't have gone out, right? So life, but you can't like obviously like overanalyze it too much. You'll go crazy. But I think like my big takeaway point is, and I tell this to other folks that really want to get into the game industry, for example, is that if you have those opportunities, you have to like make these opportunities. If you're invited to a game, like a party or an event party, like go, be cool. But go. It's better. You have a better chance of getting in an industry than just sitting at home because you're tired and you don't want to socialize, right? This was one example.
Yeah, completely agree with you. I'll touch on your time at Konami then very sort of briefly. Obviously, you got the job. You've got yourself back out to Japan. talk me through your experiences out there when working with at Konami and Metal Gear Solid 4 in particular.
It's amazing how much stuff happened in 3 years' time. I was only at Konami for 3 years, but I have so many stories and so many experiences jam-packed into the roughly 1,000 days I was there. I think if I were to zoom out and give you like the high level of it, is that from the moment I stepped into that door, I knew that I was working with a very special team. I knew that they really demanded greatness out of everybody, and I loved it. That's exactly where I wanted to be. And I don't mean to disparage the other teams within Konami, because there were a lot of hard workers at the other teams of Konami, but there was a different feel within the Metal Gear team. And there was a little swagger to us. There was a little cockiness, I'll admit. But there was something really special about that place. And so when I wanted to stay late, which I often did, to work on a project or work out an issue with somebody, it didn't have to. They didn't need much convincing. I think we were all really, really dedicated to that project. And I think, despite the fact that the public reputation of Metal Gear Solid 4 is somewhat diminished over time, I still think that even the most and I understand a lot of the criticism for the record, but I think if you just look at that game as a product and you see the amount of work that went in there, it's hard to deny that just an amazing team is behind that the creation of that product.
Yeah, and I think it gets an unfair reputation, actually. Having played the Metal Gear Solid series through, I really enjoyed Metal Gear Solid 4.
I'm glad.
I remember playing it, going back to Shadow Moses, and because I love the first Metal Gear Solid, if they remake that on PS5, that would be a day one job for me. It really will. I remember, because I went into it with little awareness of the story around it. Obviously, I played the other games, so when it came up, you're going back to Shadow Moses. I was in absolute heaven. That was I put that up there as a real sort of gaming treasure of mine, because I loved the first game so much. It was an excellent game, still is an excellent game. But I think Metal Gear Solid 4 has a bit of an unfair reputation. Some of it, I think, you can justify the criticism, but for me, on a personal level, I loved it. I enjoyed it, and as far as I was concerned, it was excellent. That's just one man's opinion at the end of the day.
But I'm glad that you loved it. A lot of great work went into it. A lot of love and passion. And I think, and not to spend too much time on Metal Gear Solid 4, but I think if you were to look at the current kind of zeitgeist surrounding that game, it's that to its own detriment, there's perhaps like too much fan service in it, including the Shadow Moses moment, right? And I think that's completely fair criticism. I think that throughout that experience, we were consistently thinking about, like, how can we wrap up this franchise? How can we finish the Solid Snake saga? How can we answer all these questions, even if we didn't know the answer to them at the beginning of the project? So we had to make up a lot of stuff as we went along, and we had some good answers and some not so good answers. So, but yeah, at the end of the day, it's a really high quality product that the team should really be really proud of, I think.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, and like I said, I really enjoyed it. I'm going to accelerate in time a little bit. Back to E3 2015. Obviously, we know what happened there with Shenmue 3. But we also touched on this last time, was The Last Guardian, which came out of obscurity, and for what it gone dark for a long, long time. How did you become involved with The Last Guardian, and where did that come from?
Well, it started with me shooting Fumito Ueda in the face with a BB gun.
That's a great introduction.
That's how it all started, Matt. I was working at Konami, and one of the things that they did, which I thought was really smart, was that they did these things, at least in Japanese, they called survival games, which is kind of like airsoft, right? Where we would go out on a weekend. We would go out to a neighboring kind of more rural area out in like Chiba Prefecture, Saitama Prefecture. We'd go out the woods. We'd have military fatigues on and these very realistic looking airsoft, like BB guns, basically. And we would do these like all day competitions, right? Where I'm on one team, there's the guys on the other team, and would take it really seriously. And it was very, very helpful for me to understand, especially with like such a military sim angle that Metal Gear has, right?
Mm.
To understand like the level of detail that these guys thought about when it comes to military simulations. So, but the interesting thing is that they invited other people in the industry to join them. So they would send out, I don't know exactly how, but like emails out to like the Sony team in Tokyo, Square Enix. So there's some people from those companies that would join us, and from the Sony team, sure enough, Fumito Ueda's on the bus with me to go out to the sticks to start playing some airsoft. And I remember just introducing myself pretty casually. He had just shipped The Last Guardian or Shadow of the Colossus,
Mm.
and yeah, so we kind of get to know each other. But fast forward like 3 hours later, I'm going around the corner. I'm surprised because Fumito Ueda's on the opposite team, is like in the corner, around like, and I've kind of just like by pure instincts, I fire at him, and I unintentionally shoot him in the face with a BB,
Oh.
and like create like this big welt on his cheek, which thankfully it fully fully healed. But that was his introduction to Ryan Payton, and I'd like to think that he thinks that things have gotten a lot better since then. Whereas, and like we kept in touch, and we can kind of laugh about it these days. But the rest of the story basically goes that once I left Konami and I was working at Microsoft, I got a phone call from an agent who now works for United Talent Agency named Ophir Lupu, and he really wanted to represent Fumito Ueda, as we could tell from the outside that he was going through a lot as like the development of The Last Guardian was starting to get kind of off the rails a little bit.
Mm.
So I ended up working as kind of like a go-between between those two, helping with translation, helping kind of navigate like the different the two cultures and everything, as we supported Ueda through the process of him creating his own studio, which is now called Gen Design, becoming independent from Sony, and then eventually being able to finally finish the game. And so from then on, like I became a lot more close with him, and especially on the business side. And
Mm.
so I now I now help run a lot of the business operations over at Gen Design and help negotiate the deal that they end up striking with Epic for their next game. And so that was a big thing I was working on for a long time. So yeah, he and I were just chatting yesterday. So he's a really good friend of mine. I really love and want to continue to support him.
Fantastic. And I'm going to bring this into Shenmue a little bit. Can you compare his working style to Yu Suzuki? Do they have any similarities, any differences, having worked with both of them?
Well, yes, I think from all three Japanese game developers I've had the pleasure of working with, the closest would be Yu Suzuki, Hideo Kojima, and Fumito Ueda. They all are quite detail orientated. I think that's the one thing you can say across the board. Obviously, they all have vision, and they have an incredible catalog and experience, and a lot to learn from those people. But one thing I've seen with working with all of them is just like this extreme attention to detail. So I'll talk about Fumito real quick, and then I'll talk about Yu Suzuki, which is like with Fumito Ueda, I'll notice like a lot of his feedback, like he'll go and like draw like exactly what he means and what he's like hoping to get out of like a very small, seemingly small moment, or like an animation and how he wants to see it different. And as the level of detail that he's and the guidance he's providing the team is pretty remarkable. And then same with Yu Suzuki. I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself. I don't remember if we talked about this last time, but I have a distinct memory of during Shenmue 3, him using like I think we talked about this, like a school teacher kind of like pointer as he's pointing to things on the screen. Is like, please move this box like this many units to the left. Yeah, we did talk about that last time, and that's something that I think that those two have in common.
It's interesting. Obviously, you work with what many consider legends of the gaming industry. So it's interesting that they all have that one common facet, that attention to detail, whether they communicate it in very different ways by the sounds of it. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think they do all communicate it differently. I think that this is like a pretty bold statement, but I mean, we'll see. I had an interesting conversation with Yoichi Wada recently, who is the former CEO of Square Enix. And he was telling me that, and in his opinion, that the Japanese game development scene had some very significant kind of midlife crisis in the mid 2000s, right around the time I was in Japan, when it became apparent that the way that games are developed in Japan had to change. And I think that both like all the gentlemen we just talked about and many more of them are used to this very top-down, detail-orientated approach to leadership and guidance and game direction. But what ended up happening in the mid 2000s, as this explosion of game development, as the explosion of Western game prowess is becoming really apparent, and the Japanese audience and consumers all both wondering at the same time, what happened here? How did the West get so powerful, and why does it not seem like Japan is keeping up with development and the quality, right? And what he told me is that there was a real big introspective moment, that the way that games have been developed in Japan up until that point, where again, very top down, had to change. And I think we've seen that happening over time, that the Japanese have really embraced a lot of different methodologies to be able to create these large games without this kind of very, very top down approach. And I think that I think for a game like Shenmue 3, it doesn't have to do that, because I think it's condensed. I think the team knows, or at least definitely Yu Suzuki knows what he needs to build. So I don't think that he's kind of transformed his business into like the more more flat and distributed model that other Japanese developers have done. But I've seen Fumito like change his style a little bit. I definitely know. I know that Hideo Kojima has changed his style as well.
It's interesting. Going back into sort of, like you say, the mid 2000s. The Western games for years, and I remember growing up, and it was always Japan got everything first. You got all the cool games before the West did. So I remember when it exploded over in the West, I think it took everybody by surprise, actually, because it was unexpected.
Totally.
And I don't know what happened with Japan, whether they got left behind or whether it was a shock to the system necessarily. I don't know, but I think games became very much a Western thing. It became cool to be a gamer, and it got traction. And I think, certainly from my point of view as a lad growing up and then into adulthood, when I was growing up, gaming was a bit geeky. It was a bit, you sit in your bedroom with a couple of mates, you play your games, and that's it. Whereas now, if you look at it, you look at the mass multiplayer games that are available, they're all westernized. They're all the westernized products. So it's interesting to see how that's developed. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but from my personal opinion, the market of Japan now is actually, with that creativity that is out there, I think there's a big hole in some respects in the gaming industry now, where there's those risks to be taken in terms of creativity and doing something different. And it's something that I think we were very lucky to grow up with, considering we grew up through the era of the Genesis, the Dreamcast, the N64, just some examples there, don't you think?
Yeah, the level of creativity that they had leading up to through those consoles, right, Matt, is unbelievable and really inspiring. And there was something lost in like the mid 2000s, and I think the big that sea change that you're describing, it's obviously like a amalgamation of many things. But I think if you were to point to one thing, you had to point to one thing. I think what you point to is Rockstar and GTA.
Yeah.
That I think is like the biggest turning point, was that when the Japanese audience and the world saw what they were doing with GTA 3 and beyond, the scale, the scope of that game. And it not only that, but it made games cool, because it was a game where you're doing all this kind of adult stuff, if you will. Some of it pretty juvenile if you look back at it, but still seemed cool. Like you're not supposed to do it. It's kind of like it's GTA 3 is like the rock and roll record that you're not supposed to have. For our parents' era, right?
Yeah.
I think that was a big turning point for the industry.
Okay, so my final question, because I know we're just about to hit the top of the hour. So in terms of obviously the original two Shenmue games and the sort of the lull in Japanese development, and then obviously the boom in Western development, why do you think, from your point of view, that obviously that there are issues with the Dreamcast and the fact obviously its life cycle ended early, but why do you think Shenmue itself as a franchise maybe didn't take off as well as it could have done, and as eventually ended up getting sort of the cult status that it did?
I'd be curious if to know your answer about this, man. I'm really sorry I don't have enough. I don't have more time. I should have allotted more. I'm sorry about that.
No, not at all.
Because
Not at all.
I'm very curious what you think, but I think I could distill it down to one thing.
Mm.
The reason why Shenmue didn't take off as well as I think we all hoped and dreamed it would, and that is, I don't think it, as much as I love it, right? Like, I think your audience knows I love Shenmue, and I think I've proven it through a lot of the actions I've done, right? Uh, I don't think it fulfills the promise of the Virtual Fighter RPG. I think
Okay.
the end product, as much as I love it, is 30 or 70% life simulator and story, and 30% maybe Virtual Fighter combat. Whereas it should have probably been more like 50-50 or 40-60 in terms of the ratio. I don't think it had enough action and amazing Virtual Fighter combat to really carry the game forward for most players. Now, nerds like me and you, Matt, and a lot of your audience, no offense, like we can all agree that we're all big nerds. It's all good. I think we love that attention to detail and that Japan simulation and the story and everything, right? But I think if you're talking about the mainstream, I don't think it had enough of that red meat, if you will, to really move it into like the millions and millions of units sold that it needed.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a very interesting answer, actually. I think if we pick that up next time,
yeah, we should.
I'd be very interested to sort of take that discussion a bit further forward. Actually, I think you raised some very interesting points, and I think I'd be interested to raise it with the fan base actually outside of here and see what their thoughts are around it, because I think there is a conception around the Dreamcast. Obviously, it died out way too soon.
Sure.
There's a lot of issues there around it, but I do wonder if as a Shenmue franchise, whether we've looked inward enough as to why. And I think you raised some very interesting points there around the content. And we love Shenmue, and it's never going to change that at all. I love that game, both of them, all three of them, in fact, for what they are.
Right.
But
right.
It's how you then translate that to a wider audience, isn't it?
Right, and I'd be curious what your audience thinks with the idea, and I mean no offense, I'd have to put an asterisk next to the results, because by definition, I think your audience and the Shenmue Dojo fan base is the audience that was captured and enraptured by this franchise. Yeah. We're the outliers. Like, we don't represent the millions of people that saw the reviews and the materials and the marketing and everything and just was like, yep, that's not for me.